It's Saturday, April 11th, 2026, and behind closed doors in Islamabad, a negotiation is about to begin that could decide the fate of an entire region. Cameras are ready, statements are prepared, and the language of diplomacy is about to be deployed. But outside those rooms, far from the polished tables and rehearsed words, the war hasn't stopped. Not even close. Because while diplomats prepare to speak about peace, missiles are still flying over southern Lebanon, and the sound of explosions is still louder than any promise of ceasefire. In the last 48 hours, Israeli airstrikes have continued to strike deep into southern Lebanon, hitting areas like Nabatieh, Bint Jbeil, and surrounding region. Officially, these are described as precision strikes targeting military infrastructure aimed at weakening Hezbollah's operational capacity and preventing any future escalation. But the reality on the ground looks very different. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Civilians pulled from collapsed homes, dust, smoke, and silence where life once existed. The kind of silence that only follows devastation. And Lebanon did not stay silent. Rockets were launched toward northern Israel, targeting cities like Kiryat Shmona and Metula, and even extending toward strategic areas near Ashdod. This wasn't symbolic retaliation. This was a message, a direct response to continued strikes, a signal that as long as Lebanon is under attack, there will be no pause, no restraint, and certainly no submission. This is no longer a contained conflict. This is escalation in motion. Right at the center of this stands Benjamin Netanyahu, a leader balancing pressure from multiple directions. On one side, calls for restraint from international actors. On the other, domestic expectations of strength and control. Publicly, he signals openness to dialogue, especially under mounting pressure from Donald Trump. But at the same time, he makes something unmistakably clear. There will be no ceasefire in Lebanon. And then, something shifted. The conflict didn't just intensify, it expanded. Because Netanyahu didn't just respond to Lebanon, he turned his attention toward Europe, specifically toward Spain. In a direct and highly controversial statement, he warned that if Spain continued what he described as a diplomatic campaign against Israel, they would be next. A statement that immediately sent shockwaves across diplomatic circles. That word alone changed the tone of the entire situation. A NATO country being openly warned, not behind closed doors, not through diplomatic channels, but publicly, clearly, directly. The question is, why Spain? The answer lies in a shift that has been building quietly over the past months. Under the leadership of Pedro Sanchez, Spain has taken one of the strongest positions in Europe against Israeli military operations. They formally recognized Palestine. They supported legal actions at the International Court of Justice. And they have consistently described the operations in Gaza and Lebanon as violations of international law. But what makes Spain different is not just what they said. It's what they did next. Instead of backing down under pressure, they moved in the opposite direction. They strengthened diplomatic engagement with Tehran. They resisted calls from Washington, and they positioned themselves as a sovereign voice within Europe, unwilling to align blindly with traditional Western positions. That shift matters, because it signals something larger than a bilateral disagreement. It suggests fractures within alliances that were once considered unbreakable. And suddenly, this conflict is no longer just about the Middle East. It's expanding, quietly, strategically, and in ways that are becoming harder to control. Meanwhile, back in Islamabad, the stakes could not be higher. Iranian officials have arrived for high-level negotiations. On the other side, the United States delegation is also on the ground, preparing for talks that have already been described as a make-or-break moment for regional stability. But even before the first word is exchanged, the conditions are already being set. Iran has made its position clear. No ceasefire without Lebanon. No agreement that ignores what is happening on the ground. No deal that separates diplomacy from reality. And that changes everything. Because as long as strikes continue, as long as rockets are fired, as long as civilians remain in the line of fire, the idea of a stable agreement becomes more fragile with every passing hour. And then, something unexpected happened. On Fox News, a retired U.S. military expert went on air and delivered an assessment that quickly gained global attention. He spoke about logistics, about the difficulty of sustaining long-distance military operations, about supply chains and strategic overstretch. But beyond the technical analysis, there was a deeper message. Europe, he suggested, is stepping back, not necessarily abandoning alliances, but becoming more cautious, less willing to engage directly, more aware of the risks, more hesitant to be drawn deeper into a conflict that continues to expand. And then came another point, one that shifted the conversation even further. He acknowledged that lower-cost adaptive military strategies, particularly those attributed to Iran, are proving increasingly effective against high-end, expensive defense systems. This is not just about technology. It's about strategy, about flexibility, about the ability to adapt faster than your opponent. And when that happens, the balance changes. Not overnight, but steadily. Back in the United States, the pressure is growing. Inflation remains a concern, energy markets are unstable, and public sentiment is shifting. More people are questioning the direction of foreign policy. More people are asking what the objective is and whether the cost is justified. That's where Donald Trump enters the picture again. Facing both international and domestic pressure, he made a bold statement. The Strait of Hormuz, he said, will be opened, with or without Iran. It's a statement that sounds decisive, strong, confident, but the reality is far more complex. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a geographic location, it's a strategic lever, a point of control that affects global energy flows, shipping routes, and economic stability far beyond the region. And right now, it is at the center of everything. Every decision, every movement, every statement seems to circle back to it. So while negotiations prepare to begin in Islamabad, the real question is not just what will be said inside those rooms, it's what will continue to happen outside them. Will the strikes stop? Will the rockets cease? Will the rhetoric soften? Or will everything continue, unchanged, while diplomacy tries to catch up with reality? Because that is the pattern we've seen before. Talks begin, statements are made, agreements are discussed, and yet, on the ground, very little changes. This time, however, the stakes feel different. The involvement is wider, the positions are firmer, the consequences are greater. Israel continues its operations in Lebanon. Hezbollah continues to respond. Europe is showing signs of division. Iran is setting conditions. The United States is navigating pressure from all sides. And in the middle of all this, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. This is no longer a single conflict. It's a network of conflicts, interconnected, overlapping, feeding into each other. What happens in Lebanon affects negotiations in Pakistan. What is said in Europe influences decisions in Washington. What unfolds in the Strait of Hormuz impacts economies across the world. Everything is connected, and that makes every decision more significant. So as April 11th, 2026 unfolds, all eyes turn toward Islamabad, toward the negotiations that could either de-escalate the situation or expose just how deep the divisions have become. Because at this point, it's not just about reaching an agreement. It's about whether an agreement is even possible, whether the conditions exist, whether the timing is right, or whether the momentum of the conflict has already gone too far. And if it has, then the question becomes even more serious. What happens next? Because if no one steps back, if no side adjusts its position, if every action continues to be met with escalation, then the consequences will not remain contained. They won't stay in Lebanon. They won't stay in Israel. They won't stay in the Middle East. They will expand. And when they do, the impact will be felt far beyond the battlefield. For now, the talks are about to begin. The world is watching, and the outcome remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. Whatever happens next will shape everything that follows.